I'm Cornell Clayton. I'm director of the Foley Institute, and on behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event today. This is part of our ongoing series on AI and politics. Today, we're fortunate to have with us one of my colleagues here from PPPA, Dr. Mark Fagiano, who's an assistant professor of philosophy in PPPA here. He specializes in ethics and social and political philosophy. His research focuses on the moral, democratic, and cultural implications of emerging technologies, with a particular emphasis on problems related to AI and governance. In addition to his academic work, he has collaborated with numerous startup companies on ethical strategies, AI design, and governance issues. His work bridges scholarly research and public engagement, and he regularly speaks on AI, democracy, and ethics at universities and forums around the world. And he has a book coming out next year focusing on AI and the problem of control and issues of democracy. So join me now in welcoming Mark Fagiano to the Foley Institute.
Okay, everyone, thanks for coming today. I appreciate it. I want to share with you some things I've been looking at recently, especially in terms of this thing called the control problem. My title for the paper here is AI, Democracy, and the Problem of Control. Now, you probably, if you've been half conscious, seen that there's a lot of talk about AI. Some philosophers would even maybe talk about whether it's intelligent or not, whether it's actually intelligent. We're not going to look into that issue today, but we do want to look into the relationship between AI and democracy. And I hope to end a little early so I can get some ideas from all of you, because I don't think this isn't really a lecture where I'm going to tell you and make an argument and that we have to follow it. It's more of an invitation to start to realize that a lot of things are happening right now, and we all have to kind of come together and think about some things together in a democratic way. Again, you've probably heard of AI and democracy, but maybe not this notion of the problem of control. So let me just give you a general meaning or general definition of the control problem as I mean it, and we're going to expand it as we move along. But how can we ensure that a powerful force or system continues to act in accordance with our intentions or our objectives? So that's basically a very general, broad definition of the control problem, which now we can start to expand. Have you ever seen these movies? You can see issues of machines getting out of human control. But I want to focus on some myths first. And I don't know if you all know about the myth of Prometheus, but this is a real clear example of the control problem. It's the introduction of a force, namely fire, by Prometheus stealing fire from the gods against the gods' decree and giving it to humanity. And the question here with Prometheus is, were humans really ready for such a force? Did they have the norms established to know how to deal with fire? That's really the earliest example of our control problem. Maybe you've heard of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is actually read in many philosophy of technology courses, right? Yeah, so with the situation here, you can see the newest one. Has anybody seen the new Frankenstein? It's quite good. Yeah, and so here we see the control problem again. And the issue here, it's actually called, I don't know if you all know this, but it's called The Modern Prometheus, is the secondary title there, right? But with the control problem here, there's a creation of the thing, the monster, the creature, and then there's no real responsibility. There's complete abandonment. So where the myth of Prometheus maybe talks about control in terms of not establishing the right norms, here we have with Frankenstein more of the question of the abandonment or the problem of abandoning the creature after it's been created. Does anybody know the golem, story of the golem from Jewish folklore? Another great example. This one is actually very relevant to some questions that we're going to address here in a second. But with the golem, there is the golem, and the golem was created to protect the community. And so the objective was protect the community. The problem is the way it didn't have enough contextual understanding not to have problems occur. So it had a very fixed objective, so the objective wasn't changed, and then the problem was a means to end relationship. Because of having a fixed objective, it couldn't have certain contextual understanding. So these three myths really, I think, show something deep within us about the anxiety of creating something that we might very well might lose control. Okay? So with each of these myths, we also can see that there's a different type of failure, right? As I just said, the myth of Prometheus is really, we could say the failure of control is really the inability to establish proper norms. For Frankenstein, it's the lack of responsibility after creating the monster. And for Golem, the objective was too rigid and there was no contextual understanding. You didn't come here to hear about myth, but I think you can see how this relates to the AI control problem, right? And just like those myths and stories, there are different types of control failure. There are different dimensions of what it means to have control. And one thing is, we could talk about it just as the first layer, something technical. I'm building a machine, a large language model. How do I make sure that I, get the right mathematicians, statisticians, philosophers of language, and all of that together so that I can give the machine certain outputs, and then I would expect certain sort of give the machine certain inputs and expect certain types of outputs. So the questions of the technical problem of AI is how do we technically build the system so that the outputs match our objectives. You might have seen right there, I said match our objectives. Are these our objectives? That's something I want to hint on a little bit right now, right? Who is in control of the technological development of these machines? There's a lot of debate. Right? And as far as a control problem, the technical problem of control is not solved. There are many different ideas of how to best do this, okay? And I want to tap into that a little bit. Another dimension would be the moral dimension. You might have heard the concept of value alignment. I want to go into the notion of value alignment and see what you all think about that. But also just in terms of kind of introducing a pragmatic ethics in relationship to this idea of control. Here, the notion of control becomes how do we, again, create the machine that's going to have the right moral values in their outputs. That's a little bit different. That's not just preferences, but that has to do with moral values, which is quite different. And lastly, the political dimension. I'm going to go ahead and not go into the cultural today, but the political dimension would deal with questions about like what is legitimate governance and how would power be distributed. We are on the verge of creating incredible forms of social power. Who's governing these things? What happens when different nations have different norms or different values for governing, right? Or they stress different values over others, okay? And then, to have such power, I mean, there are so many, and I don't want to make this talk sound like it's just, chicken little and the sky is falling, because there's a lot of incredible things that are happening now, especially in cancer research and other things, but there are also some issues that we really need to think about. And we're going to look at some examples there. Again, I'm not going to go into the cultural today, but I'll just focus on these three. Okay, so the control problem as a technical problem. I'm just going to read this. The control problem is a technical problem where the goal is to align the AI's behavior with specified objectives and reward functions given by designers, engineers, and developers. Now, this goes back to quite some time, which I'll explain in a second, but here's the great Stuart Russell. We're going to hear a lot about Stuart Russell. I really think he has some very important words of wisdom we all need to think about. But he says here, finding a solution to the AI control problem may be the essential task of our age. Now, if you're wondering about like how these systems work, how this works technologically, I could recommend this book by Mark Fagiano and David Gunkel called Communicative AI, especially the first chapter is really great. Like, how does it actually work? Like large language models, how do they work today? Does anybody know? Right, so we use these chatbots, or soon there will be physical AI, robots, and so how it might be helpful to know and to have the public know how these things work. If we're going to make decisions or we're going to have any democratic contribution to the future of this world, we better all begin to know how these things work and know about what some of the risks are. Okay? Now, a lot of this with the notion of the control problem goes back to one of my favorite philosophers, who's a great human being, might have saved the world from some of his actions and brilliance, and wasn't treated too well. But Alan Turing, during a 1951 radio lecture, a lot of people go back to Turing as kind of introducing the control problem, right? It seems probable, Turing says in this interview, that once machine thinking method has started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. Sounds a little scary. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control. If a machine can think, it might think more intelligently than we do, and then where shall we be? So this is really the first pointing to the control problem as a real technical problem. If the machines have too much control, will they have control over us? This sort of idea, right? And it's very existential as well. Where will we be if we lose technical control over these machines? And by the way, there are myriads of them. This isn't just one monolithic machine out there. Different people with different interests and different purpose and different objectives are creating different machines in different parts of the world. So not a lot of unity as far as how people are creating these machines, and the safety measures also are not uniform across the board. Okay, Alan, thank you for that warning. A great example of the problem of technical control comes from Nick Bostrom. I believe the book is 2014, Superintelligence, Dangerous Pathways, I believe it's called. And he gives his example of the paperclip maximizer. Has anybody heard of this? It's pretty interesting, a little thought experiment. So imagine first stage, you give a very advanced AI a clear objective. It's a clear objective, just like the golem had a clear objective. And the goal is make as many paper clips as possible. Okay, so there it goes, it gets started. The AI starts as an automated agent, gets to work. And there we go, look at that, more paper clips. And then all of a sudden, it has this final objective. The machine starts to think, how can I enhance myself? How can I achieve my objective more efficiently? After all, that's what we want to do. So I need to improve my own intelligence, improve my own capabilities, and acquire the right source of resources so I can actually meet this objective. Make as many paper clips as possible. Oh, also, without being shut down. This is a big one this is in 2014, and we see with a lot of studies with LLMs today, some LLMs are almost blackmail some of the engineers. I don't know if some people have heard about this, to try to not be shut off. So that's interesting. I'll say more about that in a little bit. But right, self-improvement, the AI system needs to improve itself to become stronger and to maximize the amount of paper clips produced. So there it goes. It starts to convert all raw materials into paper clips. After all, I don't know if you found out, but raw materials are also made of atoms. And now the AI can actually take those atoms and turn them into paper clips, starts to tear down cities. Poor Pullman, it's all torn down. And then it moves out to the planets. Right? This is a really interesting story. But then what about humans? Humans aren't made of atoms. We're safe. No, sorry, we're not safe. The advanced AI eventually converts all matter in the universe, including humans, into paper clips. Not quite as sexy as a story as like The Matrix, but you get the problem here. That would be a real dystopia, right? So as an example, I don't think it's right. We have Stuart Russell on maybe how to solve or address this problem of control. And his big question in this book, Human Compatible, which I highly recommend, how do we maintain power over entities that will become way more powerful than us? How do we maintain power over machines that are going to become much more powerful than we'll ever be? How do we ensure that AI systems are safe and beneficial for human beings? So Russell's approach is called provable beneficial AI. And the idea here is that the machine itself should not be aware of its objective. It should be uncertain about the final objective. So that's a pretty good answer to my mind. Of course, this is still in the works as far as a theory. No one has built an LLM based off Russell that I know of. But with this example, we have the machine checking in occasionally with humans. Now, if you look at maybe some of the LLMs you use, Anthropic or OpenAI, they use a process of reinforcement learning based on human ratings of outputs, and others as a solution in the training to be able to keep it under control, right? And just basically shaping the model's behavior by showing what humans prefer. Okay, but the problem here is that's not the only approach in town, and I'm not going to go through all of these in depth, but these are a lot of different notions. There's Russell's approach again, what he calls assistant games, right? Google's DeepMind have specification gaming, right? There's different sorts of approaches and different solutions to the AI control problem. Anthropic's, to my mind, I mean, it's very safe. It's very, at least it prioritizes safety. So, and it's based on that reinforcement learning and constitutional AI, which is something that they alone have, like, right, certain principles to follow as a constitution. One that I think might be part of the answer as well here is a technical alignment. Is not just part of, developed by engineers, but also by institutions and in relationships to different institutions and infrastructure. Here, the mandatory safety evaluations are before the frontier models are released. A frontier model like OpenAI and Anthropic would be a frontier model, a model that has reached a certain level of power or intelligence, right? But before that happens, let's have mandatory safety evaluations. Is that in place now? Yeah, right, it's not. I think that's the first time I might have seen everybody in the crowd shake their head no at the same time. What about international agreements, right? International agreements, limiting compute thresholds, okay? These are some things we want to look into more when it comes to this idea of the technical control problem. Of course, as I said, this technical problem of control is by no means solved, right? And this is a really great, if you put this into the internet, Stuart Russell testifies on AI regulation and US Senate hearing, you'll see some really great information there. And what some of the things he's saying is like, look, if you see that on the left there, that's supposed to be a black box, didn't quite work out. But a lot of these systems inside the system is this sort of a black box reality. It's like we don't really know for certain how, or the logic behind going from the inputs or your prompt to the output. So that should be a little troubling in and of itself, right? You can feed, says Russell, you can feed, I went somewhere. You can feed them an input and get an output, but you cannot examine the system's code or the logic that produced the output. If that's not troubling, I don't know what is. So things seem to be okay right now, aren't they? But we also can talk about this other dimension, and I want to do this now, is the control problem as a moral problem, right? These sorts of questions we might ask philosophically are like, what values, if we're talking about the control problem as a moral problem, what values should be guiding the system? And what justifies using those values over others? Values conflict. Which voices and which values are being used to train the LLM? And who is morally responsible for harm? This is a big philosophical question when it comes to, say, autonomous driving, right? Who is going to be morally responsible? And then here's another one. How might AI affect us? How might our agency or judgment be changed? Does anybody use a large language model on a constant basis for research? If you're in my class, don't raise your hand, it's fine. But right? If I get an instant answer every time I put into a ChatGPT or something and just get the answer, what's going to happen to the role of reflection and taking time to think seriously and carefully about some things if I can almost instantly get any answer I want? So this is definitely a moral problem. You're not going to find the solution for it today. I'm not going to give you it, not because I don't know, because we have to think about this contextually and in different situations. There it is again. Okay, so for me, in ethics, as a pragmatist, I have a few starting points. First of all, this is the very much inner Aristotle in me, is thinking about ethics as habit formation that leads to flourishing. There are different goods and there are different ways to flourish in the world, and there are plural goods. This is the big problem with selecting certain values. A lot of times you might see in the world out there of computers, people who are charged of ethics and compliance, right? Well, I think it's probably a little bit more compliance than ethics. So I think of ethics more of really a pursuit of conversation and discussion about very difficult problems that can reject or exclude certain people's visions of a good life or not include them to pursue a life of flourishing. That's my little short on ethics. So it's sort of an Aristotelian and pragmatist approach. I think some people times, on the street, you talk about something ethical, it's usually they know that because someone told them it was good. Their church, their community, God forbid, their philosophy professor, somebody had told them it was good and just aligning with the idea, okay? Think about ethics as habit formation. It's more placed in action. What are you going to do as a habit to become something different, right? Okay, so that's a little bit different. Here are a few. I'm not going to go through all these because I really do want to close here as soon as I can because I want to create a conversation. But here are some basic questions in AI ethics. The notion of behavioral nudging, right? You might, for instance, value, having a large language model tell you your next thing. Do you want me to do this? Have you ever written in there? And you said, and you get a response and it says, do you want me to do this? That's a type of behavioral nudging. How does that affect autonomy, right? Or you could think of deepfake. There's all kinds of political issues with that. It's going to get worse. Autonomous weapons, we will discuss this in a little bit. But I don't know if you heard about the big deadline for next Friday. Anybody, some people know are smiling. Okay, we're going to talk about that as well. Fairness, bias. Guess what, folks? Large language models, they get their information from the internet. Thank good the internet is not biased because then we might have a problem. But thank goodness it's not. Anyway, so that's a big problem. Just the data set bias. Whose voices are being recorded as inputs? This is a huge moral question. Privacy and surveillance. We're going to talk about that in a second here. Just general automation. Loss of jobs. Folks, you can't turn your head without seeing another news report about the loss of jobs. Will it be like other times in the past where we have lost jobs because of some technology, but then other jobs emerge? Or are we looking at a situation here where UBI might arise very quickly within the next 5 to 10 years if predictions are right? And if it's the case that UBI is going to be necessary, what do we do as a people? Should we not start saying something to our Congress people, right? And talking about this? Writing itself, again, going back to the idea of our own agency, but how will writing be changed? Again, like being able, I don't know how everybody has their own skill, their own type of writing. I'm sure like it can help in some way to have someone learn a certain style. But how much of the using ChatGPT will really create what the great rock star Nick Cave said, a mechanization of the imagination. I really like that phrase, the mechanization of the imagination. Is that what the kind of world we want? Where everybody is sort of just following the ones and zeros of the mechanized process of a LLM. So many things to discuss. I just want to talk really right now about one issue called value alignment, which I mentioned before, but I want to talk about it as a type of control problem. How do we make sure that the values are embedded in the large language model and that it has the outputs that are valued? There's a lot of problems with this, and this question really goes back to Norbert Wiener and his paper, Some Moral and Technical Consequences of Automation. This is well before anything we see today. And it's really at the dawn of cybernetics, which really, without cybernetics, you wouldn't have AI systems as they are today, maybe. You'd have other things, but with the cybernetics gave us the feedback loops, negative feedback for self-regulating, goal-oriented system. So here is Wiener's quote: if we use a mechanical agency with whose operation we cannot interfere effectively. So like a not no on-off button. We had better be quite sure that the purpose we put in the machine is the purpose we, again, there's a lot of we here, we're going to talk about that, we really desire. Here are some common understandings of the value alignment. I'll just read the one at the bottom. Artificial intelligence, right? Value alignment issue is about ensuring AI systems act in accordance with shared human values and ethical principles. Last time I checked, these vary widely across the world. Here are some really great scholars to look at. Again, Nick Bostrom, right, talks about this notion of value alignment. Brian Christian's great work on value alignment should be consulted. Again, here, thinking of value alignment as the AI's outputs being in harmony with human values, intentions, and ethical norms. So one problem that arises instantly from this is that if you think about values in this way, values get treated as discrete items we can list, some sort of stable internal states that an agent has. We just need to find the value and plug it into the machine. And right, it can be properly matched by the system's outputs. Again, the problem is that moral values vary. Principles, we'll just talk about values as a person's principles or standards of behavior or one's belief concerning what's important in life. Okay, principles or standards, right, are abstract as values. They're abstract and they're evolving. I'm sure no one in here has the same exact values as they had when they were 6 years old or 15 or maybe even 20, depending upon how old you are, right? But this isn't to say that there's no such thing as values and they always are changing, so we're at loss. It's just to say that empirically we see that values change, right? And they're various, disparate, right? So then we can think about, well, how should we design a system morally to be ethically if we're choosing certain values over others, if we're taking certain values and not including others? So whose values get prioritized? How should a system act when moral values conflict? Okay, so should we use American values, capitalistic values, Russian values? I mean, right? How do we choose the values that are going to be leading, again, because the main question is about flourishing, that will be leading to flourishing generally of most or all people, right? Values conflict with another. This isn't a problem from a pragmatic point of view, it's just a fact. Values are lived, felt, and continuously reconstructed. Can they really be used as discrete items to list and to feed into a computer? So I take really the approach here from James is that when it comes to ethical philosophy, there's no such thing as an ethical philosophy made dogmatically, I should have wrote there, in advance. So that means, right, from a Jamesian point of view, you can't just run with your deontology or your consequentialism or your virtue ethics and say, I've got the great, theory, and now I just have to figure out how to use it. Okay, so from a pragmatic point of view, it's much more messy than that. Because as I already said, ideas of different goods that are plural, right? They represent different forms of life. Values are representing different forms of life. Whose forms of life will be prioritized. Another thing from pragmatic ethics is just to say, like, we really can't say there's a final word. Any of the things I was just discussing, we can never say there's a final word to be, right, for something describing it as good. Anyway, even any more than we could say that there's a final word on experience. Values are discovered, they are forged in the consequences of shared experiences. So you might get by now, like maybe having a little bit of skepticism about the moral reality of designing these machines. Moral inquiry, too, I would say, is always experimental. Okay, so a little bit about the moral issues involved. I want to talk about the control problem as a political problem, and then turn to some questions. I'm very much in alliance with Aristotle's relationship between these two books. If you're taking my class, you understand it. ethics and politics. These are two disciplines that need to be studied together. Okay, it matters what we perceive, the idea of good habits, of a good life relate to the good society. That's basically why you could say these are, or they didn't record them as part 1 and part 2, they really are. So some of the major questions in the political control problem is, first of all, who has a legitimacy or authority, right, to decide how these are going to be deployed and what sort of world they're going to create? How does the AI system and how will it distribute power between states, corporations, experts, us, right? And then really importantly, and I hope people have a lot of questions about this, but what sort of democratic oversight can we have? Could we create a democratic oversight somehow built into the machine itself? Is that what's happening now? Is that what is happening now? Right? So how might we contest how AI systems will shape your life? And one of the fundamental questions here, kind of alluding to that, is like, who are we? When you hear about this a lot in the news, who are we? Who gets to set the intentions? Whose preferences get encoded? What kind of social and political power gets stabilized? One of the big problems with AI that people are recognizing, it seems to be such a perfect friend or perfect tool for authoritarian rule. Now, authoritarian rule, you might think of certain countries as being authoritarian, of the United States not being authoritarian. If you think about authoritarianism as actually a behavior too, not just a political system, you can see, right, how authoritarian value systems can affect how AI is distributed and what AI is used for. So a couple things it's being used for is mass surveillance. We'll talk about that in a second. Facial recognition, predictive policing. Has anybody ever seen the movie? What's the one with Tom Cruise? Minority Report.
Yep.
Finding pre-crime, predictive policing. That's happening right now. The use of AI. There's a lot of good things too. I don't want everybody to get so sad and sullen after this. But electoral manipulation. If you have an AI system in the hands of a person who has authoritarian commitments or behavior, do you think the person's not going to use AI to manipulate elections? I'm not trying to create a conspiracy theory. I'm just saying there's a problem here. One thing that has been happening is to monitor, target, and silence activists. So activists are really being followed quite a bit. Now, there's been a few international movements here with different laws. We have the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, and if you look at that compared with the United States, right, again, which values are getting promoted, right? Here, the United States pretty much prioritizing invention, where the EU prioritizes rights and precaution. That's a general way of seeing the difference, but there are different nations with different priorities, with different aims. So I really think one of the things here is there needs to be some sort of AI agency or organization that crosses borders. You all know about the NPT, nuclear proliferation, right? I mean, that something like that needs to be formed, and pretty darn quick, I think. Now, here's another thing about values that's a big problem. If you go to a doctor and say you are very sick and you want to get healthy, and you tell the doctor, I'm going to do a new diet called just eating certain vitamins and certain foods, and I know you've got a plan for me, doctor, but I'm going to go ahead and go the health route my way. Okay, the doctor then might have a little bit of a problem with that. You might have two values that are contrasting each other. One is the value of autonomy. You want the patient to be able to choose his or her own destiny for his health, right? Her health. But what about the other value that's important and hidden in there, right? You want autonomy, but you also value well-being. So a doctor can have a situation, this is just one example, where different values are contesting for the right, proper moral action. Well, the same thing happens with AI usage too, with facial recognition. It might seem pretty innocuous, right? And in some cases you can say contextually, yeah, of course I'm happy that I had my face recognized there for certain purposes. You can see in context it could be very good. But you still have a contrast in values. If you extremely value safety, right, you might be all in on that, but what about liberty? What about free from being turned into an object of suspicion? So there we have two values in contrast with one another, making it very difficult, right, to talk about value alignment. There's a great scholar in Spain. I think she's at the University of Oxford. She's written on data and privacy, and this is her quote here: "There is no democracy without privacy." She might have a point. So here we go. We're talking about the most recent situation with Anthropic and the Pentagon. Does anybody know about this situation? What do you know a little bit about it?
I just know that the Pentagon has pressured a lot of other AI companies and models to be able to be used for defense and probably attacking purposes by the US government and mass surveillance, and the Anthropic is saying, no, we don't want to use that. And the Pentagon could potentially blacklist Anthropic in terms of working with any other companies that use Anthropic for defense contracts, which would really be devastating to their market and their ability to.
Right. So the good, excellent. So everybody's in tune with a lot of things. It's happening. The deadline has been next Friday. So just so you know, you can watch this stuff in real time. It's kind of fun. So with Anthropic here, right, they basically have two red lines. They're saying, listen, we don't want you to use our AI for autonomous weapons. Oh, this can be a serious issue. I don't know if you've ever heard of Star Wars and the Clone Wars where they have the autonomous machines, right? I mean, it's weird how some of these science fiction things are kind of happening a little bit or might happen. But the two red lines are, again, no autonomous weapons and no mass surveillance. No mass surveillance, right? These are the two red lines. The Pentagon doesn't want to agree with them, right? So an AI weaponry could select, target, and attack without human approval, without human oversight. That can be a serious issue, right? Okay, so it's very easy. I know I've said a lot of things here. I want to open up the conversation here in a couple of seconds, but it's easy to be just very pessimistic about technological advance. It's easy to be very optimistic. If you listen to people, whether it's Elon Musk or someone else, you can either throw them in one of those bags. They're either too optimistic or too pessimistic. But as a philosopher and as a thinker and as a community, I think we should all really think about some of the things that might happen, that might go wrong, right? So some things happening here is that AI risks in eroding some of the very foundations of democracy, the rule of law, as we've discussed, equality between citizens, a sense of fraternity. Remember this whole thing, truth? Wasn't that great when we respected truth as a foundation of ideas, right? Big problems. And without truth, without a focus on truth and transparency, right? Transparency is a big one. You really erode the foundations of social trust. I have been talking about democracy as a way of life, which is a very Deweyan idea for a long time. And it's this basic notion of not just thinking of democracy as voting. Okay, that's where we would start. We might think about democracy, let's just vote, and we get the experts in there or the people we're bringing in there, and that's all we have to do. I've got my pin and I voted today. Well, that's one way of thinking about democracy. I really want to try to push for and hope you all think about a more broad understanding of democracy as a way of living life, right? As a way of living life, sort of behavior and certain sorts of habits which think about how people might or might not flourish, how people may or may not be empowered, right? And what to do about it, and coming together when we need to, and to demand certain responses from our government. What kind of technological future should we strive to build? Eventually, right, as you see with technology, there will be a world created. It doesn't have to be, right? What sort of world do citizens want to have arise? So a couple things closing here, and then we'll go to conversation, because I really want to engage you all and create a discussion. So first of all, I would say, if you think about ordinary, or many of you extraordinary citizens, what can you do? Demand transparency. The great thing about democracy, with all of its failings, is the demand to transparency. Democracies are built on the ability to challenge decisions after they are made. Okay? Treat AI governance as a democratic issue, not so much as a tech issue. And also living democratically with AI, doing something that we're doing here, creating opportunities for deliberation, for disagreement, and pluralism in everyday life. I have some public policy ideas too, and if you want to see my sources for that, you can just send me an email. But I'm really worried that the future is going to be one where we are just going to passively accept the world and way in which it's built and the influence AI will have over our lives. And to quote T.S. Eliot, hopefully that's not going to be a situation where the world ends with a whimper. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you all think. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes for some Q&A.
Yeah, hey, hi.
Hey, hi. So just a little bit of backstory, but there are some scholars engaging in Indigenous-focused research, such as oral history preservation using AI programs. Now, data sovereignty is already a critical issue in tribal spaces. Without AI, after years of data exploitation, exclusion of Native voices. And so while Native scholars are working on advocacy surrounding ownership, control, access, and possession of that data, AI obviously presents new challenges, many of which are unknown. So my question is, what challenges can you see now or speculate on for the future of Indigenous voices and needs in the academic space, knowing the existing issues of marginalization and simultaneous development and use of AI?
Well, I say the first thing is just poor distributions of power and not really a democratic move to consider. Like, part of authoritarianism is not considering the opinions of others, not considering the well-being of others in a democracy. So I'd say that would be the most obvious answer. I'm sure it's much more complex, but if we think about it in terms of power and in terms of a real, honest, democratic way of living would be to promote and to include different voices, especially when there are obvious effects on people's lives. And the history of how that's worked out, right? Not so good. So this is why it's so important now to be thinking about these things. Thanks. Yeah.
So my question is, like, with past technologies like the nuclear bomb, for example, the international community came together to make treaties and to limit the resources and access to that technology.
Which was it again? Sorry.
Nuclear weapons.
Oh yeah.
Like only like 9 nations or something currently have access to nuclear weapons. Even though, like, when it first came out, people were like, "Oh my gosh, every country is gonna have a nuclear weapon." And I think one of the concerns with artificial intelligence is that some teenager with their laptop in 15 years might be able to just build this super scary Terminator style like AI that could be unstoppable. Do you think that there's any way that we can like come together as a country, as an international community, to form regulations and practices that might be able to prevent that or regulate that, or do you think it's inevitable?
Well, it's great. Thanks for your question. I think like it's the level we're talking about with some of these GPTs is it's pretty difficult for anybody to do on their own, and for a lot of reasons. But I would say this is something that people are discussing and thinking about. But there needs to be more attention to these developments, and more, like we talked about before, more safety measures before things are released. Also, more of a just understanding internationally of different people's goals. The big problem here in the international scene is that there is this additional narrative that we are in an arms race, an AI arms race with Russia and China. I don't know if you've heard this basic narrative, to what extent you believe it, to what extent it's real. I mean, to some extent it is, right? So then can we not have transparency along the way? Can we not have, be able to listen to people's different concerns as yours regarding safety? Yeah, it's good.
Hi. So just speak candidly. Our systems do not reward empathy. They do not reward morality. They do not reward any sort of
That's
kind
right,
of
yeah.
good intention, right? People like Sam Altman, like Peter Thiel, are politicians. They did not get where they are by being nice people. They did not get where they are by being honest individuals. So in this kind of context, why are we still pretending like morality and ethics are still important?
Oh, they're very important. Why are we
Not
pretending?
non-capitalism.
Oh, who's
non-capitalism.
pretending?
The capitalists that are politicians.
Okay. Well, some people aren't caring.
The people in power
The
aren't
people in
caring.
power aren't caring.
The people in charge.
Okay, do you care?
I do care.
Okay.
I'm not in charge. I don't have any power.
But you're not in charge. So all the people who are in power have no care for well-being.
I don't think they got there by having care for the well-being of others.
There are a lot of problems. There are a lot of problems. And this is even more of a reason why, you need to be involved. Obviously, you have a clear, from what I'm hearing from you, clear moral understanding of maybe how important these questions are. So I would say, if you see that, it's even more upon you to think about democracy as a way of life and to think about what you can do to change it. Nothing's set in stone yet. Things can be changed, right? So I would agree with you, and I don't know the people personally, and I don't really know about their intentions, but it seems as though ethics isn't the big priority. Otherwise, the Pentagon wouldn't be talking about Anthropic getting rid of these safety standards. Yeah.
So when you start thinking about regulating AI, one of the problems is knowing what should be regulated, what should not be regulated. It's a definitional problem in some ways. And I read this really interesting piece, and I forget, it was an ethicist who wrote it. You might know who it is. But his argument was basically, look, there's two different types of problems. One problem is defined problems. The defined problem is, I have a lot of economic data, I need to analyze it. Or how do you solve this mathematical equation? Or do these MRI scans have markers of cancer in them? Those are defined problems. AI is great at solving those types of problems. It does it much better than humans, much faster, much quicker, much more accurately. The other types of problems are undefined problems. What is justice?
Yeah.
What is fairness? What is virtue? What is flourishing? So the regulation should focus on allowing AI to do the defined problem set and keeping it out of the undefined problem set, or at least forcing it to have a lot more human control over those types of problems. What do you think about that? Does that get us very far?
That's a nice division, but I would say that it would still be important to think of, as a philosopher, I don't want to give up the ideas, the bigger ideas, because they are more abstract and less concretized, but they also manifest in situations, and we can see it. So getting an idea of these bigger philosophical concepts can be very helpful for analyzing the value of certain consequences. I like the division. But as my loyalty as a philosopher, I definitely would think. But I would agree with that as a pragmatic
Job protection?
as a practical movement. I'd say yes. But I think those other questions, those other dynamics are important as well, because it speaks to us, and we can reflect and think about it, and also we can recognize these more abstract moral ideals in experiences in the context of certain consequences that arise from the use of these AIs or development of AI systems. Good, yeah.
Not to be too flippant, you've raised a number of really significant questions, and I just wondered, what does AI come up with as answers?
What is what?
How does AI answer some of those
Oh,
questions?
the AI wrote this whole thing. No, this is a really, so how does AI answer these questions?
Yeah, I mean, are we getting to the stage where we can set a question to AI and then look at the answers it comes back with? Because we've talked about human values, but if you look around, not everybody shares the same values.
Yeah.
I would expect AI to behave in a similar way.
That's right. And there's many different AI systems that are going to give you different answers, and because they have different sorts of safety measures or not. If you look at the whole situation with Grok, right? What happened with Grok with the pornographic images, that was just very bad safety measures, right? So they're promoting innovation, two different values. One, innovation over safety. Right. So there's different systems. This is part of the problem of there's just so many things being built so quickly right now, so many things happening. I just think it's time for citizens to really be thinking about this, especially in terms of just how people are going to live and survive in the future if say 60% or 50% of jobs that are now available are going to be automized or made into automated.
But if you look at the Turing test,
Yeah.
when people said, well, if you can't determine whether you're speaking to a human being or a machine,
Mm.
that's when the machine is intelligent. In other words, we're defining intelligence by the people who are most gullible.
Mm.
So
Yeah, right. It's
we
a
need
bad test.
yeah, exactly. What sort of tests are we going to apply? When we look at it, or the results, we can say, oh, that doesn't sound particularly human.
Mm.
And in that way, we'll be able to define what it is more, what are the human-like values? Because I don't see a proper definition yet of what we truly believe are values. It's like that definition of pornography. When you see it, you know it. But that doesn't seem to have been nailed down yet.
No, it's good. It's good thoughts. Yes. Yes.
I've always thought about this, but
Oh.
I wonder if AI can eventually, because you said that it's constantly building on itself, it's teaching itself how to learn, so it's constantly building and growing even faster than society can. I'm wondering if eventually they'll understand that flourishing and reaching eudaimonia, right?
Daimonia, yes.
Eudaimonia.
I have a student in my midst talking Greek. I like it.
Yeah.
Daimonia, right?
Eudaimonia.
Flourishing, happiness, doing well. Yeah.
Right. I wonder if AI will eventually see the value in that rather than in succeeding and in achievement. I wonder if they will end up building a consciousness. Do you think they will end up doing that at all?
Not a consciousness, but something. I think the worst problem is how humans will use AI that will not promote eudaimonia, right? Or not listening, maybe, or not being really concerned. Will humans even be made? I mean, will the
Right.
humans be made obsolete after a while? If the elites are in control of all the AI and we're having such development, why do we need to feed these people? I mean, this is a real concern. But as far as consciousness is concerned, this is a big philosophical one. But has an AI robot gone through 100,000 years of evolution? Right? It's not reacting to the same. So we can talk about it as a type of mind. It certainly isn't conscious in any sort of way. And I don't know anybody really working on that. So don't worry, folks. You don't have to worry about the machines taking over in that way, like an iRobot way, right? Where it's suddenly, I'm conscious. That's probably, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. You'd have to build a whole internal system, right? I mean,
Do you think it could do that?
I mean, it's possible. I never thought this would happen. So it's possible, but the question is, why would we want to do it, right?
Well, if it starts building on itself, that's what I'm curious about, is if it starts
Yeah.
doing it on its own rather than humans doing it for
Yeah.
it starts building on itself.
Yeah, it's in the realm of possibility. It's definitely a live option. It's not impossible.
I'm not trying to scare it.
No, I mean, right. Yeah, but you don't have to worry about your LLM doing anything yet.
Okay.
Not going to turn into HAL quite yet.
Okay, sounds good.
So I've got a quick question. I grew up loving science fiction, watching films. 2001, obviously scared about HAL taking over our lives and killing us all because of the greater objective. But I also normalized the idea that at some point AI and robots and automation would kind of free humans and
Yeah.
give us this sort of sense of freedom to, write poetry, become artists, and have more leisure time, not have to work a 40+ hour week every week. You mentioned UBI as well, and I think that's a terrific idea where we're going to have to go. But I think instead what we're seeing, instead of this utopian idea, instead we now have art, which is someone putting a bunch of prompts into an AI to create a painting, and instead of it freeing us, it feels that that's more like enslavement, and I wonder what you might think about.
Oh, we're always on our way to a new dystopia, right? And that's even more greater reason, right? Again, going to what you said right there, is the idea is not so much about is how human beings will use the machines, or the people who have massive control over it will use it. And I do fear that there are many different dystopian scenarios. That's why there has to be more democratic engagement. People will start to realize what you all are talking about, what we've said here today, as things start happening, okay? And I hope we start kind of earlier than later. Please.
You do fairly regularly privilege a whole range of things, but particularly your sort of model of some kind of democratic questioning. Do you have any model historically about cultures that have managed anything like you're hoping can control this stuff?
Well, I think, again, one of the things I'm drawing from is the American pragmatist tradition on the focus on, and even Sidney Hook's great work on democracy as a way of life. And that is just, I think that's a really important place to start without thinking about the actual computation and how to actually get this into affect systems. But it's really important to, I think, go back and have some sort of foundation of thinking about democracy, not just simply as voting. You know, we think we're doing so much with voting, but democracy is a way of living life. It's also about believing, having faith in the possibilities of others, that when they become empowered, they can live a flourishing life. So there's faith involved in that. And there's different sorts of ways of living life that both Hook and Dewey talk about, which I just think, where it's not like a, cure-all, I think it's a good place to start.
Now.
Pre-order now. Thank you all so much.
All right, thank you so much.